Great to be here. Thank you all for joining us. Once again, my name is Mark Johnson. I work for Filecoin Green, which is a Protocol Labs initiative to, one, make Filecoin verifiably sustainable, but also to build tools to measure and reduce environmental impacts of all sorts. I am very fortunate to be joined here on stage with my esteemed panelists to talk to you today about the role of Web3 in enabling climate action. And so just to kick us off, I want to hand it over to the panelists just to give a brief round of introductions. Who you are, what you do, and what brought you to working in this space at the intersection of Web3 and climate action.
So I'll go first, I guess. Hi, everyone. My name is Bree. I run a startup called Carb0n.fi. This was inspired by my previous venture building a plastic waste recycling startup. And I identified that there was a liquidity and incentive issue with financing climate projects. In the first instance, these will be carbon credits. So we essentially provide incentives for our users to contribute to carbon credit projects. I'll hand it over to my fellow panelist, Max, next.
Thanks, Bree. Hi, guys. I'm Max. I'm founder and CEO of Carb0n.Base. We have two main kind of philosophies or what we're doing. One of them is that in Asia Pacific, we're building a blockchain-based carbon registry. You can think of it as a carbon central bank, and we're going to hopefully service India, China, Indonesia, like the major kind of Asia Pacific carbon emission sources, creating and assigning value to people putting carbon in the ground. And the other side of it is actually we're launching one of the world's first reward programs for individuals and companies to become carbon neutral. And the rewards are going to be Web3 backed, so you can actually earn Web3 rewards for being sustainable.
Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex from KlimaDAO. So KlimaDAO is a project that's essentially looking to develop a scaling solution for the voluntary carbon markets. The voluntary carbon markets themselves have been around for about 20 years. Through our history, our founding team's history, we've kind of learned that there's some quite severe problems with the voluntary carbon markets. So by leveraging the Web3 tech stack, we think that we can make the markets much more efficient, and we can help them to scale up. And when I say scale up in terms of the voluntary carbon markets, it's about scaling up climate impact, right? It's about closing the emissions gap and getting us towards net zero by the middle of the century. So that's what KlimaDAO does. I work on our DAO strategy. We launched in October last year. We've been quite disruptive, led to the tokenization of about 25 million carbon credits. And now we need to start scaling that. We want to scale what KlimaDAO is doing to the Web2 world, the off-chain world, and really get adoption for Web3 tech for climate solutions.
Oh, amazing. And there's so much to unpack here. I'm really excited to get into this. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's kind of paint a picture for the audience. Let's set the scene with an environmental outlook, right? Where are we? How did we get here? And where are we going from an environmental perspective? And Bree, I want you to kick it off because I know you spend a lot of time thinking about this, particularly, from the corporate angle. Why should Web 2 and Web 3 care? And more importantly, how can Web3 enhance the transparency and act as a value driver for these corporations?
So one of the key questions that we considered when we were looking at financing was transparency and seamlessness. There are a lot of friction points for both sides of the supply chain, both demand and supply, to actually account for what they do. So I think one of the phrases that we used before was carbon identity. So very simply put, if today a company or a brand tells you that they planted 10,000 trees somewhere, you want to be able to check that instead of being able to trust their closed source report. So that sense of open source identity is what we want to bring to the carbon credit markets. I think a lot of the transparency is brought about by blockchain, and that is just the tech supporting the whole Web3 ideology. Sure. I think in terms of corporates and individuals, we hope that this open source will actually build a lot of trust and then help us actually scale the carbon credit markets and help us scale the fight against climate change.
Two quick comments for us here. We're celebrating kind of this exciting ecosystem of crypto, but we're also living through the beginning of doomsday. Literally, we're going to start seeing severe challenges for our ability to exist as a species on this planet. And so my thesis is that as human beings, as we look at the abyss of the catastrophic climate change coming at us full on, we have the ability to use blockchain as a coordination layer to get a few billion people to get our stuff together so we can actually avoid this catastrophe. And climate change is, in my view, one of the killer applications of blockchain because it relies on creating market-based incentives for large-scale economies with individual actions and participants incentivized at a per action level. So blockchain is that particular technology. The final thing I would say is next week after token is GFANZ in Singapore. GFANZ is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And there's representatives representing maybe like $100 trillion flying to Singapore to have a conversation of how they're going to spend their $100 trillion to mobilize human action. If we want the blockchain ecosystem to scale from our measly, one trill today to 10 trillion economy, being able to be relevant to the climate transition is going to be where the next institutional adoption comes from.
100%. Agree with what you say, Max. This past year, we've seen some quite visceral effects of climate change. In the UK, we had 3 days in a row where it exceeded 40 degrees centigrade. It doesn't sound that bad, and after being in Singapore for 3 days, okay, maybe 40 degrees isn't that bad. But in the UK, 40 degrees means the trains don't work, the kids don't go to school, our society shuts down, so we're not ready for it. Meanwhile, southwest of France had these forest fires, worst that they've ever had on record. So these climate change impacts they're becoming visceral, and they're becoming quite visceral in areas of the world that have typically been quite resilient. So, we've also seen Pakistan, a third of Pakistan underwater. We've seen this typhoon off the coast of the Philippines just this week. So the impacts of climate change, they're now affecting everybody. They're affecting the whole world. And to Max's point, I think what's interesting is now everyone's getting involved. Something that resonates with me when I have this conversation is Mark Carney, who's the ex-governor of the Bank of England. A couple of years ago, he was introducing the UK's Green Tech Week. And he said that climate change is the biggest commercial opportunity for a generation, right? And I don't think he says that because he's an unashamed capitalist. He thinks let's leverage these pain points, let's make money. He's saying it because one, we need scale again, and two, everyone cares about it. So I think what we're starting to see in 2022, we're starting to see the impacts of climate change reveal themselves quite explicitly. We're starting to see the markets react, and the markets want to get involved. And we'll unpack the role of the voluntary carbon market within that. But to your point, Max, totally agree. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. I love those insights, and I couldn't agree more. Right? Climate change is an existential threat that we are already facing here and now. And let's be honest, those extreme heat waves that we saw this summer, the massive flood that Pakistan recently experienced, the droughts that China and the US have experienced recently, as well as the massive forest fires. Unfortunately, that is the new normal, right? And all of those events really remind me of some recent reports that have been produced. Alex, to your point, from the regulatory perspective, the United Nations Environmental Program releases an emissions gap report every year, and they recently highlighted that climate change is no longer a future problem. It is a now problem. So we must address it with the fullest force possible. So I want to ask you all, what tools do we have at our disposal to actually address these climate challenges, to enhance our ability to promote climate action around the world? And Alex, I want to jump back to you real quick, because I know you spend a lot of your time at KlimaDAO from a strategy perspective, taking a look at the evolution of the policy space going on, specifically in the carbon markets. So can you speak to us a little bit about that?
100%. I think, to start at the high level, we've seen the climate change policy conversation evolve quite a lot in the past 10 years. I think previously climate policy was quite forward-looking. How do we force the economy to do certain things that we want it to do? Regulations, carbon taxes, focus subsidies, that sort of thing. I think what's been really interesting recently was the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which is a very misleading name. The Inflation Reduction Act is essentially an energy act, and contained within the Inflation Reduction Act is a bunch of money that's going to be thrown at tax credits for investing in clean tech. So they've kind of gone against the grain, which has historically been a regulation-focused approach or a carbon tax-focused approach. And they said, you know what? No, we're not going to try regulate. We're not going to try and force the market to do something. We're just going to throw money at it. And by doing that, we're going to unlock a load of capital. So I think that's, at a higher level, is a really interesting example as we move from a historical stick approach in terms of policy to what appears to be more of a carrot approach, a market-based approach. But more specifically with respect to the carbon markets, and again, another interesting point. So at COP26 last year in Glasgow, there was a line in Article 7 of the Paris Agreement, which was amended off the back of conversations at COP, which spoke about the role of the voluntary carbon market in allowing countries across the globe to transact carbon liabilities and carbon credits with one another. So we're starting to see that the carbon market, which has traditionally been a private sector-led initiative, a private sector-led market, be acknowledged as a key mechanism that can help scale climate action. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to this point. Maybe I'm laboring it too hard, but I think it's relevant for the crowd in this room that, the crypto crowd, which is the Web3 tech stack, demonstrates to us how efficient we can make markets and how accessible we can make markets. So I think pairing the Web3 tech stack with the climate change opportunity and some of the existing infrastructure that is there is really quite powerful. And yeah, that's essentially what KlimaDAO is trying to do specifically, but with the voluntary carbon market.
So I think that crypto is actually a perfect marriage for climate change, or using it as an instrument to fight climate change, because I think everybody here in the crowd probably knows and have heard at some point, oh, crypto consumes so much energy, it's unsustainable. And obviously no one's going to stop mining like Bitcoin. No one's going to stop mining Ethereum or building or like hashing. So what are some of the things that then we can use this technology or like the mechanism for good? And actually just to have some fun facts, I think I don't know how many people here actually watched the Ethereum merge last week or were here for the merge, but when the merge actually happened, it actually reduced its own global consumption by about 90%, I think 90 to 99%. But the overall impact on global energy consumption of us as a human race was only 0.02%. So in the first place, I think Ethereum, for example, never really consumed that much energy. So actually, it's perfectly positioned now to become a key component in getting liquidity and also creating transparency with the underlying Web3 technology for climate change.
Max, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I also, I used to do machine learning and AI, and so, when we look at machine learning is a efficiency technology. Like one person plus a computer can do a job of 100 people. Blockchain fundamentally is not a, efficiency technology per se. It's an incentive technology. And when we look at the people gathered here at this conference, we have some of the brilliant people in the world thinking about how to create incentives for staking, for DeFi, for GameFi. All of these sort of things actually tap into human emotions. We think that climate change requires this particular level of expertise. If we can find ways to economically and socially reward people to do the right thing for climate change, then we don't need to actually berate them. We don't need to keep telling them doomsday scenarios. They will actually, of their own volition, decide to do that action. And so I think this particular nexus of how do we actually change the value drivers is actually reminiscent of the incredible work that Filecoin is doing. Right? Filecoin, as Mark mentioned to me earlier, has 11% of the storage capacity of Amazon, right? Without having to have any of the servers running, because 4,000 individual people have actually built companies to provide storage. If we can have the same type of carbon removal market, right? I don't even want to call it the voluntary carbon market. We call it the carbon removal market. If we can have 4,000 large companies participating in the carbon removal market globally, then we actually start making huge dents in climate change at an industrial scale.
Certainly. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've always thought that the key beneficial add of blockchain networks and crypto primitives is that they can be utilized to realign incentives and drive collective action towards common goals. And to me, and I think I can speak on behalf of you all as well, what's the best common goal that we could all strive for, right? Enhancing global climate action. And it's really great to see all of these new policy measures coming in from the top-down angle, as well as corporate actions being taken by companies all around the world to enhance and strengthen their climate disclosures, their rules around how their operations should be run. But to me, all of those actions, policy measures and corporate actions, underlying them are two crucial questions. Will this be enough? And how can we prove that those actions are truly additional from the emissions mitigation perspective? So, Max, I want to kick it back to you on this one specifically. How can we utilize, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. How can we utilize Web3 tech to enhance the transparency and the verifiability of climate actions?
So Bree made an excellent point earlier. When these large companies are buying credits today, there's no public audit trail of that purchase. Microsoft says, I bought $5 million of credits, show me, right? Where's the record? It doesn't exist that easily. Blockchain is really interesting because blockchain is auto-disclosive. Like instead of having to hire an ESG manager to write a report about what you've done, if you do it on chain, it just lives for the rest of perpetuity. So I think that's one of the sort of easiest wins that blockchain provides to actually disclose the process. The second thing is, going back to what Alex said earlier, the original carbon registries were built about 20 years ago. And so 20 years ago was the beginning of Facebook. It was the beginning of the early days of the internet. It was like MySpace, right? The world we live in today is way more digitized, way more recorded, way more sort of able to be monitored. We have the ability to take pictures of our planet every 24 hours. So I think there's a big missing chunk of actually ability to use planetary scale data to actually record and measure what's happening on the surface of the planet as actually our measurement. I had a phone call with a person who has a gold standard project on forestry. They get to take a picture of their forest every 3 years. So 2 years in, someone might have come down and removed some of the forest. You have no idea. So we want to live in a world where actually the rewards being given, the carbon removal credits being given, are being handed out on a daily basis. The people actually participating in this removal process feel daily that they need to continue doing the right thing.
Anything to add, Alex or Bree?
Yeah, I think the carbon market has traditionally is kind of split into two sides. There's the supply side and there's the production of these carbon credits. Carbon credits themselves are essentially a digital commodity, right? So it's a commodity, it's produced, it's traded within the market, and then you also actually consume it digitally as well, right? It's not like taking a delivery of oil or wheat or something where you actually consume it. When you retire a carbon credit or offset a carbon credit, you do it and you receive a PDF or some verifiable document that shows that you're responsible for it. And so the supply side of the market that you're talking about, Max, is really in need with some uplift. It needs an injection of capital. It needs new methodologies. It kind of needs to catch up with what's happening on the demand side of the market, which is where KlimaDAO has found its home to date. I don't think it doesn't mean that we don't want to participate in the supply side of the market. I think we just need to figure out how to do that. How do we start to incentivize the generation and the development of really high quality carbon credits that are fit for purpose within the market? Because there have been some quite strong criticisms around the supply within the carbon market at the moment. But I think with more capital, more attention, more brains, that's what we can do. But if I may, just talk a little bit about the kind of Web3 tech that KlimaDAO has leveraged on the demand side of the market, because I think it's quite powerful. So at the beginning, I mentioned we bridged these 25 million carbon credits onto the blockchain through a tokenizer, through our partners at the Toucan protocol. And these 25 million carbon credits, they're split into about 5 different pools of carbon credits. Got the base carbon ton pool, the nature-based offset pool, the MCO2 pool. And these 25 million tons represent about 2.5% of the carbon credits that have ever been issued by the Verra registry. So it's not an insignificant amount, but it's not a huge amount. But what's interesting is that through the liquidity pools that we've developed by pairing these tokenized carbon credits with our Klima token on SushiSwap, we've actually facilitated about $5 billion worth of volume in the past year. That's about 5 times more than what the carbon market itself, the whole of the carbon market itself did the previous year. And so a liquid market is an efficient market. People can come in, they can access it. So it's powerful. But in addition, the point of a carbon credit is not to just trade it, right? It's a digital commodity. The whole point is to consume it. Because when you consume it, you're saying that you're responsible for the environmental benefit that the carbon credit delivers. So we've built another piece of infrastructure called our retirement aggregator that lets organizations or individuals come into our liquidity pools and retire carbon credits very quickly and very efficiently. The whole journey of sourcing and retiring carbon credits in the legacy market, if you want 100,000 carbon credits to be retired, it can take, at best, days, usually weeks, usually months. On the blockchain, you can now do this in 45 seconds. You can pick from millions of credits that might fit your objectives as an individual or an organization on the type of credits that you want to use. You don't need to do any of this through a third party. It's all done on the blockchain, and at the point where you retire it, it's retired onto the blockchain, so it's verifiable. You have the project hash, which tells you the specific project that it represents, all the way to your wallet address to say that you're the one who's done the offset. Really powerful technology. It's really been quite disruptive in the market. And then the final thing that we've developed, infrastructure that we've developed to the data point, is our carbon dashboard. So you can visit it at Carb0n.fi. And this is a live dashboard of a helicopter view of what's happening with on-chain carbon. How much liquidity is there? What is the pool price? What are the projects contained within the pools? So it's really quite impactful. If you wanted to access data in the voluntary carbon market previously, you probably couldn't do it. Or if you could do it, you had to pay for a report that was retrospective. So you might get market data from 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 12 months ago. Now it's all instant, and you don't need an account. You just log in. And we can only do that because of what blockchain brings us in terms of the data. So all these really interesting technologies, they're slowly stacking together. To your point, Max, I think we need to do some more stacking to integrate these demand side things with the supply side things. But I think it's exciting, and we're kind of at the beginning. We're less than 12 months in.
I love those points that you just made, and I really appreciate you breaking down the demand side apart from the supply side. And to your point, I mean, you guys have been a massive disruptor in the space, driving some massive efficiency gains on that demand side. Bree, you are on the other side of the table. You're on that supply side, looking at how we can enhance the transparency, the completeness of data, the verifiability of the data underlying these credits, and allowing corporations that are interested in buying these to be exposed to this crucial data. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think before we get there, just to also get back to what we were talking about, the Web3 part. So I'm not a crypto native. I think today I can say that I am. But what I like about the whole narrative around crypto is that we talk about banking the unbanked. What we do at Carb0n.fi is to essentially democratize the process of getting access to these carbon credits, which, as Alex already said, is a commodity. We don't necessarily want... Okay, full disclosure, I used to work in commodities trading, but we don't want someone like Shell, for example, coming in and then buying like all the credits in the world and then continue relying on fossil fuels. I think if anything else, the energy crisis that Europe is facing now particularly shows us that we need to move away from these. But we don't want just the giants getting in on the act. They should set the pace. They are the ones who are leading the flock, so to speak, by driving brand value as an influencer in the corporate space. But we want smaller companies, smaller corporates, individuals as well, to be able to participate in this whole marketplace. And that's what I think Web3 and crypto is so good at. I think what Mark is driving at is that, of course, we want the data integrity. When you look at blockchain as a technology, whatever data that goes on board, if it's garbage going in, it's garbage coming out. And blockchain is not a standalone technology for climate tech or for solving some of the problems within the space. And which is why we have people like Filecoin who are making sure that by optimizing the way that data is actually stored and checking the integrity of the data, we actually have a really, really good base for building up other kinds of technologies to complement blockchain to actually scale the entire marketplace. And quick one, I actually had a really, really good chance to dive into what decentralized content addressing is, thanks to you guys. And I think what I really enjoy is that we didn't start out, most of us, in a place where, let's sell carbon credits necessarily. I think we started out like, here's the friction points, how do we optimize this process, efficiency, and then that's where we started from. So when we talk about any kind of traditional financial market, that the outcome of it is sustainability if you optimize everything from the beginning of the supply chain, from the demand side to the origination point.
I couldn't agree more. Max, do you have something to say?
Just add a little bit more, I think, on some of the problem space and kind of where verification can play a really critical role. So I want to tell you a story, a very brief story. there's a country in South America that is actually carbon negative, right? It's the smallest sovereign country in South America. It's net negative 20 million tons. But unfortunately, for the last 40 years, they've unable to receive any economic aid for being negative, right? And so they have to choose, the people living in this country have to choose between either cutting down their trees or continuing to live in poverty and retain their neutrality status. Like, what we want to do with the Web3 community here is actually to give them a third rail, give them a third walkway, which is the ability to keep their trees, right? Get recognized for the value of putting carbon in the ground, have verification so we can feel comfortable that this indeed, protection happening, and then allow the people to prosper, allow the people actually to be kind of onboarded into the wealth that is the Web3 economy. And so I think when we look at the world today, we're starting to see the intersection of sovereigns, countries, thinking about how do they get climate justice for the actions of their natural resources. And all of the tooling we have here, the free market efficiency, the verification, these are kind of tools to achieve this goal of actually achieving human dignity at the conservation level of planetary protection.
It's wonderful. It's such a beautiful story. You've explained it to me before, and every time I hear it, I'm so excited about the future. And honestly, what all of us represent in this emerging stack of the new carbon markets. Incredibly excited for the future. Keeping an eye on time, I want to leave the audience with your closing thoughts, your call to action. So anything that you have not said before, now's the time. Who wants to kick us off?
Sure. I would just say, I don't know how much you guys in the audience have looked into these sorts of projects that we're developing, but I think this represents a really interesting real-world use case for Web3 technology. It really has just begun. 12 months ago, there wasn't much happening here at all. So if you're not already familiar, really recommend jumping into some of the Discords, following some people on Twitter. There's a whole community building around this idea of regenerative finance. And now's the time to learn about it and see how we can really put Web3 to good use.
I just want to leave everyone with a book recommendation. This book has changed my life. I think it might change your life. It's called Ministry for the Future. And it's a book that's written 2020. It's literally just written last year, 2 years ago. And it talks about the near future. It talks about the next 10 years. Inside, there are fundamental ideas that I think are tremendously exciting, implementable today by the wonderful people on this panel, including the amazing work that Filecoin is doing as well. So that's my hope and gift. You guys use this book as a reference point for thinking about how do we participate in this economy.
So I think I will be the maybe bit of doom and gloom here, but I want to make it very relatable for everyone. The 2004 tsunami that happened in the Philippines was a long time ago for many people, but for the people in the community who were actually affected, a lot of them are still rebuilding. And that took, we had a few climate events in that space of time, but in the last 2 months, we've had 6. So it's happening more frequently. And if you haven't experienced it, I'll make it in a very individual level for you. Statistically speaking, the carbon footprint that is emitted by 3 people around you will kill 1 person around you. So if you have at least 3 friends, 1 in 4 of you is going to be affected that way. So in the sense that I wanted to say this because there is something that everyone can do. Even if you think that you can't do anything right now, you can start looking at it. And then in the time, step forward if you want to speak to any of us to understand better how you can contribute or to make a change. We would love to speak to you guys, I think. That's what I wanted to leave you guys with.
That's such a perfect point to close us out with. Thank you for that, Bree. Yes, we do hope that this resonated with all of you. If you are interested in talking, please come find the panelists after this conversation. Also, just want to throw out there, if you find yourself in Bogota later in Colombia, we'll be hosting the Sustainable Blockchain Summit on October 12th, where all of these lovely folks and more will be there to continue these conversations. So thank you for your time today.